Here are 3 tips for every Marvel Rivals tank hero from a Celestial 1 Peak Flex Tank player. I'm going to try to keep this video short and sweet for all of you guys, so if you want to learn some niche tips that will help you climb out of elo hell, then keep watching. Let's start this party off with who I think is the most slept on character in this game, Thor. Use your bubble while close to enemy squishies before you ult. It is not stated in game, however the bubble slows enemies when inside of it. If you catch most supports inside of your bubble and instantly follow it up with your ultimate, most supports will be too slow even with their movement abilities to escape your ultimate. Tip number 2, you can stack your empowered form back to back if you save 3 hammers and pop your empowered form initially, then use your bubble to refill your hammers. This gives you an extremely long damage pressure time frame. You can do this to pressure out the front line or build your ultimate. Tip number 3, you can consecutively dash into enemy tanks if you hit them once after you dash and use your bubble cooldown when out of hammers. This can be like a pseudo Wolverine pull and take the enemy tanks way out of position. You can also use this tech on specific maps to get environmental easy kills. This can also be used on Hulk to infinitely reset his jump. Let's move on to our next tank hero, Magneto. Tip number 1, be sure to always combo a fully charged secondary fire with 2 primary fires. This is Magneto's main damage combo and his kill pressure. Tip number 2, you can use Magneto's ultimate defensively. This can be done to various different enemy heroes like Star-Lord, Punisher, Iron Man, Groot, Human Torch, Hela. You get the point. This can provide massive value to your team and also charge your ultimate to do massive damage. Tip number 3, coordinate with your teammates to use your bubble offensively and also counter bubble enemy ultimates. This is what separates a Grandmaster Magneto from a Celestial Plus Magneto. If you can consistently counter ultimates by bubbling your squishies, it will provide massive value to your team and make the game so much easier to win. And just a little bonus tip here, it can be really challenging to hit big Magneto ults on your own. A lot of teams will recognize that you're ulting and not shoot it to charge it up. So don't be afraid to combo with your team, combo with like a Strange ult, a Rocket Amplifier, or even a Mantis damage boost can make all the difference. Let's move on to Doctor Strange. Tip number 1, you should always be alternating your melee with your primary fire when at close range, as your melee gives you 10 charge for every hit. Tip number 2, this is a little known fact about Strange, but when ulting, his E, or Maelstrom of Madness, does double damage to enemies that he has stunned. And now for the 3rd tip, I wanted to do a little section on his teleport ability. So these are 2 general tips on how to use Strange's TP. You can portal spawn points on payload maps. This is super underused by Strange players and can guarantee the objective when you're on offense. To do this, just place 1 TP in front of their spawn door, then flip the 2nd TP around at their 2nd spawn door, then place it. Now for the 2nd tip, you can offset your initial TP when portaling out of spawn points on payload maps, and you do this to counter their counter TP. I'm sure a lot of lower elo players won't recognize or try to go for this tech. It's just a safe practice to do this. Tell your team, hey, I'm gonna place my portal a little bit to the left of me, so if the enemy Strange tries to counter TP, you may miss. Let's move on to our next hero, the Thing. At the end of your charge, you leave an AoE earthquake effect that disables enemies from using movement abilities. This is the same effect as Namor's ultimate, but the area of the circle is a little bit smaller. So use this to peel on enemy flankers or confirm kills on enemies who push in too far and rely on their dashes to get out. This ability is how the Thing is able to get a lot of value. You need to be denying enemies their movement abilities and help confirm kills with this ability. The Thing is really strong at peeling, so really try to look to be less aggressive and make more team-oriented plays. Tip number 2, your E, or Empowered Leap, gives you and whoever you dash to damage resist. You should be looking to peel for your team with this ability a lot. If you can use this ability on an ally who is mid-Spidey combo or being jumped by a Psylocke, for example, that damage resistance that you give can be the difference between them living or dying. Tip number 3, don't use your ult on your own as you don't have enough damage to follow through with the eliminations. Make sure that your team is in position and ready to follow up on your ultimate to confirm the kills. A little bonus tip is that your ult does go through shields, so don't be afraid just to throw it in there. Let's move on to our next hero, Hulk. First and most important tip is to always be charging your jump and tracking your health. You can still use all of your abilities and primary fire, while your jump is charging, so it is best to have a jump ready for whenever you need to reposition. Hulk is actually relatively squishy, so always keeping an eye on your health and having a jump ready to go to get out of sticky situations will help you so much. Another level to this would be to track enemy abilities that can reset your jump, like Invisiwoman Boop or Thor's Dash. If you need to get out fast, be sure to bubble yourself first, as your bubble will block any ability that would reset your jump or pull you back into the enemy team. Tip number 2, you can do a pretty insane stun lock with Hulk's ultimate. First, land a radioactive lockdown or E before you use your ultimate, then use your ultimate to reset your cooldowns, and then once the initial stun runs out, you can stun them again with the new cooldown. After you use your ultimate, then either wait for another E cooldown and hit the same target, or press your ultimate again to stun lock the enemy for like 8+ seconds. This isn't super useful in some cases, but if used against another Hulk who is ulting, you can entirely shut down their ultimate within the stun lock duration. Tip number 3, little known fact about Hulk is that you can actually change his setting so that you don't need to hold space or your jump button to charge his jump. I personally don't use this, but I know that some players do really like this feature, so it is worth checking out. Let's move on to our next hero, Captain America. Tip number 1, with your team up from Thor, don't use it while your passive is active. Basically, your team up from Thor and your passive ability are pretty much the same ability. They both give you ranged attacks. So to keep the uptime of your ranged attacks longer, do not use both of the abilities at the same time, but rather stagger them so that you can have a longer uptime on your ranged attacks. Tip number 2, throw your E or your Vibranium Energy Saw ability at the ground close to the enemy that you're aiming at. When you throw your E at the ground, it will bounce to the closest enemy target. Do this and it will make it so much easier to land, and you won't have to worry about aiming as much. Tip number 3, your ultimate is a defensive ultimate. Save it to counter enemy DPS or tank ults. You'd be surprised at how well Cap can keep his teammates alive in his ultimate. So some examples of when to use this would be like during an enemy Star-Lord ult, an enemy Hela ult, Punisher ult. In all those instances, a Captain America ult can really be the difference between your teammates dying or sustaining through the fight. A quick bonus tip for Cap is that his playstyle similar to Spider-Man's in the sense that he's always in the enemy's backline, so he's not necessarily in the best spot for his team to heal him. Though it is good to know where all the health packs spawn, so if you don't know that, definitely just try to make a note of learning where they all are. Let's move on to our next hero, Groot. Tip number 1, you can place 2 Thorn Lash walls at the same time by holding Shift. This is super underused by lower ranked Groots, and I see so many Groot players missing out on this tech. Tip number 2, be sure to box in your ultimates. Your Shift, or Thorn Lash walls, do big damage and will block LOS of any supports behind your ultimate. Placing walls behind your ultimate ensures enemies are trapped and will take maximum damage without easy escape routes. Additionally, since your Shift or Thorn Lash walls will block the line of sight of enemy healers, it forces them to reposition or become ineffective. Tip number 3, you can Groot ult ceilings to pull enemies out of enemy support ultimates like Luna ult or Cloak ult. This is a pretty niche tip, but if you're able to pull it off while Luna is ulting, you can totally negate her ultimate and make an insane outplay that will get your team so much value. Let's move on to our next character, Peni Parker. Tip number 1, Peni has so much outplay potential with her right click or cyber web snare. You can cancel out or counter so many ultimates with this ability and also shut down flankers that are diving your backline. You should always be tracking enemy ultimates like Strange ult, Iron Man ult, Scarlet Witch ult, and be prepared to cancel out their ultimate with this ability during their windup. When you get better at this and you're able to do this consistently, you will provide so much value to your team. Tip number 2, spawn lineups. There are 2 specific spawn lineups for your mines where you can throw your mines past the spawn doors, yes, even before they are open, and create a trap of mines where the enemy typically walks at the beginning of the game. This is obviously somewhat of a niche tip, as in higher ranks, players may see the mines before they walk into them or avoid these spots off spawn entirely. However, it is still worth trying these lineups when playing these maps. Tip number 3, Stay in your webs as much as you can. While you are in your webbing, you get 25 shield healing per second, along with a bonus movement speed buff. The shielding can also stack up to 4 times, up to 100 shields per second, and also give you ult charge. So please always try to stand on your webbing. It can be the difference between you winning and losing a duel. Let's move on to our next and final hero, Venom. Tip number 1. The first and most important thing to learn when playing Venom is target prioritization. Venom does negligible damage, and it is very easy for enemies to heal through whatever damage you are able to do. So something as simple as shooting at the correct targets along with your other teammates / flankers can make a huge impact on your gameplay. The correct order of target prioritization is almost always supports first, then DPS, then tanks. Tip number 2, try to set yourself up before the fight starts in a spot where you won't need to grapple in to use your dive combo. This way you can save your grapple cooldown to get out if needed. You don't always need to do this, however it can give you some more room for error in your initial dives. Tip number 3, you can combo with Luna ultimate / rocket ultimate to nearly one-shot squishies with your ultimate. The combo leaves the enemy squishy at one-shot health, so any other damage from your team will finish the elimination. This is definitely worth doing while you have a rocket or Luna on your team, so don't be afraid to give it a shot. Alrighty boys, and that is 3 tips for every tank hero. If you guys like this video, please go ahead and show me some support, show me some love, like, comment, subscribe. If you guys are looking for some more educational content on how to climb the ladder, I'm currently doing a no mechanics challenge to Grandmaster. So I have 3 parts out now, so go ahead and watch those videos if you want to learn more.